everyone, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be filming one of my most favorite types of videos to film every single year, and that is the mid-year book freakout tag. So far this year I've been able to read 42 books, which I'm honestly really proud of. I've definitely not read that much the past few years, so I really do feel like I've been able to accelerate my reading game a bit this year, which, you know, I'll take what I can get if you know what I mean. Before I dive into the questions themselves, I of course want to first call out that I have still a bunch of petitions, places to donate, ways to help, ways to get educated on the Black Lives Matter movement. This is not a moment. This is something we need to be constantly being vigilant on, so I just want to point you all to all those resources down below. I also wanted to say I have two videos linked down below, Jocelyn and Jaleesa's. As I've been saying, this is one of my favorite videos to watch and to make, so I have been watching a bunch and their videos are some of my favorites. I found some amazing books from their channels, so please check out their videos below and their channels. They're amazing booktubers. Now, without further ado, let's dive into the questions. The first question is, what has been your favorite book of the year so far? Definitely starting with a bang, and I honestly have to say The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. In a lot of ways, I'm not surprised by this selection. N.K. Jemisin is by far and away one of my favorite authors of all time. Her writing is just incredible. Her stories are just next level. This is the 7th book of hers I have read, and she's literally never disappointed me ever. If anything, she's just made so many different series that are some of my favorite of all time. That being said, this is the first book to a new urban fantasy trilogy, and it was just the most clever, genius just story that caught me on page 1 and I could not put it down. Specifically, this is a story set in New York City, and it's essentially a fantasy story about like cities being alive. These basically like are birthed and then become a living, functioning thing. And there are people that exist within these cities that are like true manifestations. Particularly in this story, we follow New York City, which had some complications with its birth, if you will. Therefore, we're following a group of people, 5 in fact, one representing each borough of New York City, and they're essentially the manifestations of that neighborhood, and they're all kind of working together. Well, most of them are working together to try to dispel this sort of evil force that's trying to prevent New York City from taking that next step. This book is just incredible. Not only does it capture the voice of New York City so exceptionally well, it just felt like a love song to so many different areas of this city that I also live in. I love so much. On top of that, the characters are dynamic. The book also fully represents the diverse nature of the city itself through the characters and the representation present in this. It has great queer rep as well. The villain literally is the woman in white. It's essentially an evil Karen to prevent her from infecting everyone around her and saving the day. I really cannot laud this book enough. It was an incredible ride, and I loved every single second of it. 5 out of 5 stars. Read this book if you haven't. Read N.K. Jemisin if you haven't. It is so wonderful. Next question is, what is the best sequel you've read so far this year? I've read quite a few sequels. Obviously, I read a lot of fantasy, so I read a lot of series, but I definitely think I'm going to go with Shorefall by Robert Jackson Bennett. This, of course, is book 2 to the Founders trilogy, the first one being Foundry Side, one of my favorite books of last year, and the second one definitely did not disappoint. It definitely escalated, elevated, added a lot of intensity to this fast-paced fantasy story. It follows a cast of characters. It definitely kind of has a heist at its center, but it's definitely much bigger than that. This also has one of the coolest magic systems you'll encounter. It's essentially like fantastical coding is how I often describe it. And essentially our main character can hack into like physical things and reprogram them to behave in a different way. Herself and her friends and her girlfriend basically are just trying to prevent their city from falling apart and falling into evil hands. Again, this book was a wild ride. I read it so quickly. Cannot wait for the 3rd one. I love Robert Jackson Bennett, one of my favorite authors for sure. And Shorefall was not a disappointment. Next question is new releases that I haven't read yet but really want to. One of them is new to me, but not necessarily a super new release, and that is Upon a Burning Throne. I learned about this book on Starless channel recently and immediately bought it. Essentially, as she was explaining it, I was like, I gotta pick that up. I gotta read that book right away. And it's essentially a fantastical epic retelling of a classic Indian folk tale. And that alone just really captured my attention. It's obviously very long, it's hefty, it's multi-POV, it just feels like something I would like a lot. I hear the world building is impeccable and the writing style is really like grand, which is something I love. I love heavy political fantasy. I love when there's a lot of like names and things to keep track of. There's something very satisfying about like a really dense historical background in a fantasy novel that I just chef's kiss, love so much. So this is one I really want to pick up soon. And the next book is technically not out yet. I'm just breaking all the rules here, but it comes out so soon, and it's out in the UK, and that is Empire of Gold by S.A. Chakraborty. I love the Dabbobad trilogy. This is the third book, the final book within this trilogy, and I have been dying for it, obviously, since I read the second one last year. Just such an incredibly well-crafted, Middle Eastern-inspired fantasy story with such an amazing cast of characters, intense politics. Again, I love political fantasy, and this has intense politics that I just can't wait for the third one to come out, and it's one that I am just dying for and hopefully will read immediately upon arrival. But there are just so many books I want to read. I feel like that's the struggle, right? Too many books, too little time kind of thing, you know? Question 4 is, what are some of your most anticipated releases for the back half of this year? And again, there are so many. I think the one probably at the top of my list that a lot of fantasy readers can agree is the 4th book to the Stormlight Archives by Brandon Sanderson. I honestly feel like I am not prepared for this novel. I need to revisit, top of my brain, Brandon Sanderson's first 3 books in this series, given that it's like my favorite series of all time, and this is the 4th book, but I can't wait. It's gonna be so epic. 4th book to this series, it should be no surprise that this is at the top of my list, but there are so many books coming out this year. There's a new Ray Carson book within the Girl of Fire and Thorn series I'm dying for. There's also the 4th book to the Ember in the Ashes series, which I just cannot wait. I feel like I've been waiting for that book for so long, and that is by far and away one of my favorite YA fantasy series. So I'd say those are like 3 that come immediately to mind, but there's so many amazing books coming out this year that, you know, can't wait to spend all my money. This question is biggest disappointment, and I'm gonna go with Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This is a book that I liked. It's not that this book is bad. This is also a book that a lot of people would describe as their favorite, very foundational to fantasy and like historical fantasy. And I just thought, with all of the factors that I know I love, which I love a historical setting, I obviously love fantasy and magic, and I like a dry political setting, I just thought this book was gonna be it. I thought I was gonna love it. I thought I was gonna just fly through it. But it was not that for me. It was a very slow read, sometimes painful. I enjoyed it, but it was just not the reading experience I was anticipating for myself. I'm very proud of myself for reading it, but overall this book was just kind of like slow going for me, a little painful, a little disappointing. This question is biggest surprise, and that's gonna go to like my general discovering of historical romance. Like, I never thought I would be reading like bodice rippers, which is essentially what these books are, but I have, and I love so many of them. I just don't know, like, my love for historical romance is like a real true thing that I feel like I'm gonna keep for the rest of my life. I find them to be so entertaining, so easy to read, like a perfect de-stressor for myself. Authors that I've discovered so far, Tessa Dare. I also know I have so many books in this genre to check out. I'm like so behind. I've only read 7 or something out of a whole genre, which there are so many books. So I'm still very much a newbie, always taking recs, so let me know if you have some favorites. But I would say that would be my biggest surprise, because I just never really thought I was gonna be a big fan of that, and I generally don't read contemporary, even that much romance, but historic romance, that's my niche. Next question is favorite new author. This could be a new to you author or a debut author. I'm doing both in that. And I'm doing Roseanne A. Brown, who just released A Song of Race and Ruin. This book completely blew me away. It was such a fantastic debut YA fantasy novel. It captured me literally from page 1. I fell immediately in love with the characters. It's a dual perspective YA fantasy novel with such a wonderfully crafted world, rich politics, an amazing magic system, and truly like characters that are built with actual like backstory and care. Like, this was such a strong debut novel. It really makes me feel like I'm gonna love everything this author puts out. Particularly, I feel like it's a series I'm gonna love just as much as like An Ember in the Ashes, because that's also like a dual perspective YA fantasy story. And when I compare them, their plots aren't similar, but what they're both so strong in is, if that makes sense. Fantastic characters, a great romance, wonderful friendships, great politics and like care to the world building. This book just really, I can't speak highly of it enough. It blew me away, and it was just such a fantastic debut. I'm so glad I picked it up. I can't wait for more books by this author, because this was so good. Next question is newest fictional crush. I'm gonna be honest, I don't generally get like fictional crushes in books. I more fall in love with the relationship and like the growing of two people falling in love, if that makes sense. But I'm gonna go with Chain of Gold by Cassandra Clare because, I don't know, I found this book to be so entertaining in the romance department, and I love so many of the different pairings that I know we're gonna see and explore over this trilogy, and it was just so angsty and dramatic, and I ate it up. Like, I love angst and yearning, as Cindy would say. I just love it. I love when people are almost so in love and so in pain and they can't be together and they're just like thinking about each other all the time. Like, that's the part of the romance that I love. It's the before, it's the yearning. And Chain of Gold, I feel like, had really good yearning. So that's the one I'm gonna pick for this. Question 9 is newest favorite character. I have 2 for this. This was hard to narrow down to because I feel like I've encountered so many favorite characters, but I would say like new, which means new to me series. There's 2 series I've read a chunk of books of. It's the Farseers trilogy, and the other is the King Fountain series. I've read a chunk of books within both of these. So first I'm gonna say Fitz, because he's really grown on me, and I've been with him since he was a wee child, and I've seen him grow up to be like a strong man, trying to save the world. I can respect that. And he always has like cute animal companions, which also I enjoy. And then I'm also gonna go with, not Owen, whom in this I also love, which is the main male character, but Elizabeth Mortimer. Didn't say her full name, she'd be very mad about it, but I loved her. She is more of a secondary character, but her chapters in the King Fountain series are always my favorite. I really enjoy her personality. I love her strength. I love her balance with Owen, and I loved also seeing her as a young child growing up into a woman and like handling those politics. So those are gonna be my 2 favorite characters, but there's so many I could say. I just love, characters are my favorite. I love so many people. Next is a book that made you cry. I don't think I've read anything this year that's made me like weep or has been so sad, but I've decided to go with Starless Sea because this book was so beautiful. I wanted to cry sometimes, if that makes sense. This is such a beautifully written, mesmerizing tale of 2 people and like some sort of bizarre underground library and this sort of like weird lost society of keepers finding their way and trying to save the world. It is bizarre, but so wonderfully crafted, and you also encounter 2 characters that you love so much and root for them so much that like it doesn't take much for you just to, I guess, cry with like a beautiful metaphor. Erin Morgenstern is also really known for her excessively flowery writing, and for me personally, I love that. Like, that is something I look for often in books like this. I love a metaphor. I love all that shenanigans, and this book to me was just so beautiful. It made me want to cry, so that's why I picked it. This is a book that made you happy, and I'm going with Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This was like the first book in historical romance that started this whole like month of my life where almost all I read was historical romance. This book completely caught me off guard and took me by surprise of how quickly I fell in love with it, and just thought it was so much fun, such an easy read, put a smile on my face the whole way through. It was just like charming and like a perfect book to read, for example, if I'm like super anxious or something. I don't know, something about this book was just absurd and fun. There was a manor, there was a snowstorm, there are 2 individuals that hate each other but love each other, there's lots of eye contact and ridiculous propriety, and there's libraries, there's top hats. It was everything I wanted, and I just found it to be so much fun, and yeah, it was just a great historical romance story. Can't wait to read more books by this author, but we shall see how they are. But for this one, I did really like. Doesn't love a like bitter, grumpy Duke character, you know, who like has shut himself off from love, but he's like super hot. And then a girl who's like, I don't want to marry, and then they hate each other, but then they love each other. It's just the best. Next question is, what are the most beautiful books you've bought so far this year? Is this stack of the Lies of Locke Lamora series. I bought these special cloth bound hardcover editions this year that I just love so much. I just think they're really special, and I love the reading experience with these. I have all 3 of them. So I have the Lies of Locke Lamora, the Republic of Thieves, and lastly, well, I did these out of order, but Red Seas Under Red Skies. I've read the first 2 books in this series and I've really enjoyed them, and I just really love those editions. The very last question is, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And if I'm being honest with myself, there are so many books I need to read before the end of this year. but I narrowed it down to 2 just to show you. But no, there's a lot of stress inside of me thinking about all the books I need to read and want to read. But the first one I'm gonna go with is The Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. I've been putting off starting the Wheel of Time series for what feels like my whole life, and all of a sudden it just feels like now is the time to pick up and start this very long 13-book epic fantasy series. Obviously I love fantasy, but I do feel like there's a few series I've just been kind of putting off that I just don't want to anymore, and this is definitely one of them. So I'm very hopeful in the next 4 months that I'm gonna be reading this first one. Yeah, so there's obviously a lot, so this is gonna be a long journey. If anyone wants to read Wheel of Time with me, let me know. But yeah, this is definitely on my list, as is The Burning White by Brett Weeks. It's almost absurd how long I've put this book off, to the point where it's embarrassing that I haven't read this. So I am embarrassed, simply put, that I have not read this book. This is the 5th and final book to the Lightbringer series, one of my favorite series. I think I'm putting it off because I don't want it to end. At least that's what I'm telling myself. But yeah, I haven't read this yet. It's absurd, and I need to read it. So this has got to happen soon, guys. I just don't know what is wrong with me. Alrighty guys, that is the mid-year freakout tag. Let me know down below some books that you've loved this year, as I would love to know. So many books I want to read, so little time. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I will see you soon with another one soon. Goodbye.